The mafia boss's baby wouldn't stop crying on the plane until a single mother did the unthinkable. The infant's screams pierced through the first-class cabin like shattered glass, relentless and desperate. Every passenger within earshot winced, shifted uncomfortably, or shot irritated glances toward the source of the disturbance. But none dared to complain. Not when they saw the man holding the child. Lorenzo Romano sat rigidly in his seat, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. The custom-tailored black suit that normally made him look like a dark angel now seemed to constrict around him like a prison. His normally cold, calculating eyes held a flicker of something foreign. Raw, unfiltered panic. The baby, his son, continued to wail, tiny fists flailing against Lorenzo's chest. 2 months old, and already bearing the weight of a crown he didn't ask for. 2 months since Sophia had taken her last breath bringing this child into the world. 2 months since Lorenzo Romano, the most feared man in the American underground, had become something he never thought possible. Helpless, one of his bodyguards leaned in carefully, speaking low enough that other passengers couldn't hear. "We could land early. Find a no." Lorenzo's voice was still wrapped in silk. "We stay on schedule." But the baby didn't care about schedules. He didn't care that his father controlled half the East Coast's criminal operations. That men crossed streets to avoid his shadow. That entire families had disappeared at his word. The infant only knew hunger, discomfort, and the absence of the warmth he'd known for 2 precious months before it was stolen away. Lorenzo had tried everything. Bottles prepared by the nanny who waited at their destination. Pacifiers that the child spat out with surprising force. Rocking motions that felt awkward in his arms that were more accustomed to signing death warrants than soothing cries. Nothing worked. 3 rows ahead, Rachel Parker heard the desperate cries and felt her body respond instinctively. Her breasts act with sympathetic letdown, milk threatening to soak through the nursing pads she still wore, despite the fact that she closed her eyes, forcing down the wave of grief that always came with that thought. 6 months. It had been 6 months since she'd held her own daughter. 6 months since the tiny heart had simply stopped beating in the night. No explanation, no warning. Sudden infant death syndrome, the doctors had said, as if putting a name to the nightmare made it hurt less. Rachel had been heading home from a grief counseling conference in New York, trying to put her shattered life back together. She was a pediatric nurse, or at least she had been. After losing Lily, she couldn't bring herself to return to the NICU. Couldn't watch other people's babies thrive while hers lay cold in the ground. The crying intensified, and Rachel felt tears prick her own eyes. She knew that sound, the desperate, hungry wail of an infant who needed something primal, something only a mother could provide. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armrests. "Miss, are you all right?" The flight attendant paused beside her, concerned. Rachel looked up, then back toward where the crying originated. "That baby. He sounds I'm a nurse. Maybe I can help." The attendant's expression shifted to something between relief and skepticism. "The passenger has been quite firm about not wanting assistance, but if you'd like to try, I suppose it couldn't hurt." Rachel unbuckled her seat belt before she could second-guess herself, following the attendant down the aisle. With each step, her heart pounded harder. This was insane. She was still lactating. Her body hadn't gotten the memo that there was no longer a baby to feed. But she couldn't just offer to breastfeed a stranger's child, could she? Then she saw him. Lorenzo Romano sat like a king on a throne, even in distress. Black hair swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by an angry god. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened by precisely maintained stubble, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore power like a second skin, and danger rolled off him in ways that made her survival instincts scream to turn around. But the baby in his arms looked so small, so helpless against that broad chest. The infant's face was red from crying, tiny features scrunched in misery. "Sir," the flight attendant began nervously. "This passenger is a nurse." She wondered if she might. Lorenzo's gaze snapped to Rachel, and she felt the impact like a physical blow. Those eyes could strip flesh from bone, could make grown men confess sins they hadn't even committed. For a moment, Rachel forgot how to breathe. "A nurse," he repeated, his voice low and rough like gravel wrapped in velvet. An accent lingered at the edges. Italian probably, though Americanized by years in the States. Pediatric, Rachel heard herself say, though her voice sounded far away. I know that cry. He's hungry. I've tried the bottle. Frustration cracked through Lorenzo's controlled exterior. He won't take it. Rachel's eyes moved from the man to the baby, and something in her chest cracked open. The infant's cries had taken on a desperate edge, the kind that spoke of real distress. She'd heard it too many times in the NICU, and her body responded before her brain could catch up. Some babies won't take artificial nipples, she said softly, stepping closer despite every instinct telling her to run from this dangerous man. Especially if they were breastfed initially. He was his mother. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. A flash of such raw pain that Rachel caught her breath. She died, he said flatly. 8 weeks ago, giving birth to him. The cabin seemed to go silent around them, though the baby still cried. Rachel's eyes burned with unshed tears. Her grief recognizing his even as her nurse's training kicked in. Then he's probably refusing the bottle because he's looking for something familiar, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something he associates with comfort and safety. Their eyes locked, and Rachel saw the exact moment he understood what she was implying. His jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he might order her away. But then the baby let out another desperate wail, and something in the untouchable mafia boss crumbled. Are you offering what I think you're offering? His voice was dangerous testing, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Rachel swallowed hard. This was beyond insane. But the baby was suffering, and her body was producing milk that had nowhere to go. And maybe, just maybe, she could help this tiny life even though she'd failed to save her own. I'm still producing, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. I lost my daughter 6 months ago. My body hasn't. I haven't been able to stop it. If you'd allow me, I could try. The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger in first class had gone quiet, sensing they were witnessing something profound, even if they couldn't quite understand what. Lorenzo Romano stared at this woman, this stranger who had just offered the most intimate gift one human could give another, and felt the ground shift beneath him. In his world, there were no gifts. Everything had a price. Every kindness hit a blade. But this woman's eyes held only compassion and a grief that mirrored his own. The restroom, he said abruptly, standing with fluid grace despite the child in his arms. It's more private. Rachel's heart hammered as she followed him toward the first-class lavatory, acutely aware of the bodyguard who fell into step behind them. This was real. This was actually happening. The bathroom was small but luxurious, as an airplane bathroom could be. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his large frame taking up most of the space, hesitation written across features that probably hadn't shown uncertainty in years. I'll wait outside, he said finally, his voice rough. Unless you need, I'll be fine, Rachel assured him, though her hands shook as she reached for the baby. What's his name? The word came out like a prayer and a curse. After my grandfather. Rachel took the infant carefully, cradling his small body against her chest. Antonio's cries had diminished to hiccuping whimpers, as if he sensed something was about to change. She looked up at Lorenzo, at this dangerous, powerful man who had just entrusted her with his most precious possession, and saw vulnerability that took her breath away. I'll take care of him, she promised. Lorenzo nodded once, sharp and controlled, then stepped back to let her close the door. The moment it clicked shut, Rachel felt the weight of what she was about to do settle over her like a blanket. Her hands moved on autopilot, unbuttoning her blouse with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The nursing bra came next, and then she was positioning Antonio at her breast, supporting his tiny head the way she'd supported so many infants in the NICU. For a moment, nothing happened. Antonio whimpered, turning his face against her skin, searching. Then his instincts kicked in, and he latched on, and Rachel felt the familiar pull and release as he began to nurse. Tears streamed down her face, silently, as she looked down at the baby in her arms. He wasn't Lily. He would never be Lily. But he was a child who needed comfort, who needed nourishment, who needed the one thing her body was still desperate to provide. It's okay, little one, she whispered, stroking his dark hair. It's okay. Outside the door, Lorenzo Romano stood with his fists clenched at his sides, his bodyguard wisely maintaining distance. The silence that had replaced his son's cries was both a relief and a torment. He'd just handed Antonio to a complete stranger. He who trusted no one, who verified the background of every person who came within 10 feet of his child, had just given his son to a woman whose last name he didn't even know. But something about her had reached through the armor he'd built around himself. Maybe it was the grief in her eyes that matched his own. Maybe it was the desperate courage it took to offer such an intimate kindness to a stranger. Or maybe it was simply that for the first time in 8 weeks, someone had offered to help without wanting something in return. When the bathroom door opened 15 minutes later, Rachel emerged with Antonio sleeping peacefully in her arms. The infant's face was relaxed, his tiny fist curled against her chest, completely at peace. Lorenzo looked at his son, truly peaceful for the first time since Sophia's death, and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something that in his world could get people killed. "He's asleep," Rachel said unnecessarily, her voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "He ate well. He'll probably sleep for a few hours now." She moved to hand Antonio back, but Lorenzo's hand shot out to stop her, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising gentleness. "Your name?" he demanded, though his tone had lost its edge. "Parker. Lorenzo Romano." He released her wrist, taking Antonio from her arms with practiced care. His son barely stirred, too content to wake. "I owe you a debt, Rachel Parker." "You don't owe me anything." Rachel began buttoning her blouse, suddenly aware of how intimate this situation was. "I was happy to help. In my world, everything comes with a price." Lorenzo's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what you just did, feeding my son, giving him peace when nothing else could, that's not something I can simply walk away from." Something in his tone made Rachel's heart race with more than attraction. It sounded almost like a warning. "I should get back to my seat." The word was command, not request. Lorenzo shifted Antonio to one arm with the ease of someone who'd been doing this alone for weeks, then pulled a business card from his suit pocket. "Call me when we land. I want to properly thank you." Rachel took the card reflexively, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and from the slight widening of his eyes, he'd felt it, too. "That's not necessary. It is to me." His voice had gone soft. "Dangerous. You gave my son something precious. The least I can do is buy you dinner." Rachel knew she should say no. Everything about this man screamed danger, from the way other passengers averted their eyes when he passed to the bodyguards who shadowed his movements. But there was something in his expression when he looked at his son, a vulnerability that called to her own broken heart. "Dinner." She found herself agreeing. "Just dinner." A ghost of a smile touched Lorenzo's lips, transforming his face from dangerous to devastatingly handsome. "Just dinner," he echoed, though something in his tone suggested he was making a promise neither of them understood yet. Rachel returned to her seat in a daze. The warmth of Antonio's small body still imprinted on her skin. She didn't notice the way Lorenzo's bodyguards were already pulling up information on her. Didn't see the calculating look in Lorenzo's eyes as he watched her walk away. In his world, in the world of the American Mafia, where tradition ran deeper than blood, what had just happened wasn't simple. It wasn't just a kind stranger helping a child in need. In the old ways, the ways his grandfather had taught him, the ways that still governed the ancient families, a woman who nursed a Dawn's child became bound to that family, became bound to him. Rachel Parker had just fed his son. She'd given Antonio the one thing Lorenzo couldn't provide, the one thing he'd been desperate for since Sophia's death. In doing so, she'd fulfilled a role that, in the traditions of their world, made her something sacred, made her his. Lorenzo looked down at his peacefully sleeping son and felt the ghost of his grandfather's words echo through his mind. When a woman feeds your child from her own body, she becomes the child's mother. And a Dawn's child can have only one mother, his queen. He hadn't believed in the old ways, not really. They were superstitions, traditions from a different era. But holding Antonio truly at peace for the first time since birth, Lorenzo felt the weight of those ancient rules settling over him like a mantle. Rachel Parker didn't know it yet, but the moment she'd offered to feed his son, she'd stepped into his world. And in his world, some things were sacred. Some bonds couldn't be broken. Some debts could only be paid one way. The plane continued its journey through the clouds, carrying two broken souls toward a destiny neither had seen coming. Rachel Parker, the pediatric nurse running from her grief, and Lorenzo Romano, the mafia boss who just found something more precious than power. Someone who could give his son the love of a mother. But love in his world came with a price. And that price was written in tradition older than America itself. Rachel had saved his son's life tonight. Even if she didn't realize it, Antonio had been slowly starving, refusing every bottle, growing weaker each day. The doctors had talked about feeding tubes, about hospitalization. But one act of compassion from a stranger had solved what weeks of medical intervention couldn't. And Lorenzo Romano always paid his debts. Always. The black SUV that picked up Rachel from the airport 2 days later was not what she'd expected. She'd imagined a normal restaurant, maybe something upscale, given Lorenzo's obvious wealth. Instead, the driver, a mountain of a man with cold eyes and an earpiece, had escorted her into a vehicle that screamed federal protection or something darker. The windows were tinted so dark she couldn't see out, and the locks engaged with an ominous click the moment her door closed. "Where are we going?" Rachel tried to keep her voice steady as the SUV pulled into traffic. "The Don's estate, miss." The driver's eyes met hers in the rear-view mirror. "He thought you'd be more comfortable with a private dinner." Given the baby, the Don, not Lorenzo, not Mr. Romano, the Don. Rachel's stomach twisted as pieces began clicking into place. The bodyguards on the plane, the way passengers had given him a wide berth, the ease with which he commanded others, the casual use of the title Don, a title she knew from crime dramas and news reports about organized crime. Oh God, what had she gotten herself into? The SUV wound through the streets of Newark before heading into the suburbs, each mile taking them farther from public spaces and closer to sprawling estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. When they finally turned through a particular gate, this one guarded by 2 men with very obvious weapons, Rachel felt her heart climb into her throat. The estate was massive, a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of The Godfather. Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, and Rachel counted at least 4 other security personnel patrolling the grounds before the SUV pulled up to the main entrance. "Miss Parker." A woman in her 60s appeared at the door, her severe expression softening slightly as she looked Rachel over. "I'm Maria, the house manager. Romano is waiting in the nursery. If you'll follow me." Nursery, right? Because this was about Antonio. Rachel clung to that thought as Maria led her through a home that belonged in Architectural Digest. Marble floors, priceless artwork, furniture that cost more than Rachel's yearly salary. Everything screamed wealth and power and danger. They climbed a grand staircase to the 2nd floor, and Rachel heard it before she saw it. Antonio's cries, not as desperate as on the plane, but still distressed. Maria opened a door to reveal a nursery that was both opulent and surprisingly warm, decorated in soft blues and silvers with a mural of clouds covering one wall. Lorenzo stood by the window, Antonio wailing in his arms, his expression tight with frustration. He'd shed the suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and Rachel's breath caught. Extensive tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. Not regular tattoos. These were deliberate, symbolic. She recognized a few of the images. A crown, what looked like family crests, the kind of ink that told stories in the criminal underworld. His voice was rough with relief as he turned. "Thank God. He's been asking for you. Asking for me." Rachel's voice came out higher than intended. "Lorenzo, what is this? Who are you really?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. Respect maybe that she was asking directly. He gestured to Maria, who slipped out silently, closing the door behind her. Suddenly, Rachel was alone with the most dangerous-looking man she'd ever met and his crying infant. "I think you already know," Lorenzo said quietly, still rocking Antonio. "You're smart. You've put the pieces together. You're with the Mafia." It wasn't a question. "I am the Mafia. At least I'm the head of the Romano family. We control most of the operations from here to Boston. Shipping, construction, waste management. Some legitimate, some." He paused. "Less legitimate." Rachel backed toward the door, her hand fumbling for the handle. "I need to leave. Antonio needs you." Lorenzo's voice stopped her, not because it was commanding, but because it was broken. "Look at him, Rachel. Really look." Against her better judgment, Rachel did. The baby in Lorenzo's arms was thinner than he'd been on the plane. His cries had a weak quality to them that made her nurse's instincts scream alarm. Dark circles shadowed his tiny eyes, and his skin had lost the healthy flush infants should have. What happened? She was moving forward before she could stop herself. He looked fine 2 days ago. He won't eat. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. Not the bottle, not anything. He took 1 bottle the night we landed, and since then, he's refused everything. The pediatrician wants to hospitalize him. Put in a feeding tube. But his voice cracked. I can't do that to him. He's already lost his mother. If I could give him what he needs, I would. But you can't. Rachel finished, understanding flooding through her. She reached for Antonio, and the moment the baby was in her arms, his cries diminished to whimpers. He turned his face against her chest, rooting instinctively. Oh, sweetheart, you're so hungry, aren't you? I'm sorry. Lorenzo ran a hand through his hair, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable. I know this isn't fair to you. I know I have no right to ask, but when I saw how he responded to you on the plane, how peaceful he was. Rachel, I haven't seen my son peaceful since the day he was born. Not once. Rachel looked from the baby in her arms to the man before her. This terrifying, powerful, dangerous man who was also a desperate father trying to save his child. She thought of Lily, of how she would have moved heaven and earth to keep her daughter alive. How she'd have begged, borrowed, or stolen anything that could have prevented that terrible morning. This is insane, she whispered. I know you're a criminal. Yes, I should run out that door and never look back. Probably, but he needs to eat. Rachel looked down at Antonio, whose whimpers had turned to hiccuping sobs as he continued to search for sustenance. And I can help him. I'll pay you. Lorenzo spoke quickly, urgently. Whatever you want, a salary, a house, anything. Just help him. Please. They did it. This man, who clearly wasn't used to asking for anything, who probably ruled his world with absolute authority, was begging her to save his son. Can you give us privacy? Rachel asked quietly. Lorenzo nodded and moved toward the door, but Rachel's voice stopped him. Wait, I need to know something first. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away, despite how intimidating he was. On the plane, you said I'd stepped into your world, that what I did created some kind of debt. What did you mean? A muscle in Lorenzo's jaw ticked. For a long moment, he didn't answer, and Rachel thought he might not. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of tradition. My grandfather was born in Sicily. He began, his accent thickening slightly as he spoke of his heritage. He brought the old ways with him when he came to America, built this family on those traditions. One of those traditions is about children, specifically about who feeds them. I don't understand. In the old families, blood isn't the only thing that makes family. Milk does, too. Lorenzo's eyes were intense, burning with something Rachel couldn't name. When a woman nurses a child that isn't biologically hers, especially the child of Adon, she becomes bound to that family, becomes sacred to them. In the oldest traditions, she becomes what? Rachel's heart was pounding. The child's mother, Lorenzo finished. And in our world, Adon's child can have only one mother, his wife. Rachel stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said, trying to understand if he was saying what she thought he was saying. You can't be serious. I don't expect you to marry me, Lorenzo said quickly. This isn't medieval Sicily, but in my world, what you did on that plane, it means something. It means you're under my family's protection now, whether you want it or not. It means other families will see you as connected to us. And it means, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. It means I can't let you walk away. Can't let me. Rachel's voice rose. You don't own me. I'm not some possession you can claim because of an old superstition. It's not a superstition to the people I deal with. Lorenzo's voice hardened. The moment word gets out that you nursed my son, and it will get out, Rachel. Things like this don't stay secret in my world. You'll become a target. Rival families will see you as a way to get to me. You'll need protection. My protection. Then I won't do it again. Rachel held Antonio closer. Even as the baby's whimpers intensified. I'll help him today. Make sure he's eating properly. And then I'll leave. No one needs to know. Maria already knows. My driver knows. My security team knows. Lorenzo stepped closer, and Rachel fought the urge to back away. And in about 3 hours when my underboss comes for his weekly report, he'll know. By tomorrow, every family from here to Chicago will know that Lorenzo Romano's son has a wet nurse. That's how fast information travels in this world. Then tell them I'm just an employee, a hired nurse. It doesn't work like that. Frustration colored his tone. The symbolism matters. The act itself matters. You gave my son something precious, something intimate. In the eyes of the old families, that makes you precious. It makes you mine to protect. I'm not yours. But even as Rachel said it, Antonio let out a desperate cry, and she felt her body respond. Milk letting down despite her emotional state. The baby sensed it, too, rooting more frantically against her shirt. Lorenzo saw her cease, saw the understanding in her eyes that her body was betraying her resolve. He needs you, he said softly. And like it or not, you need me now, too. Because I promise you, Rachel Parker, the moment other families find out about this, your life will never be the same. Rachel looked down at the suffering infant in her arms, then back up at the dangerous man before her. Every rational part of her brain screamed to run, to get as far from this world as possible. But she was a nurse. She'd taken an oath to help those in need. And this baby, this innocent child who'd lost his mother the day he was born, needed her desperately. 1 week, she heard herself say. I'll stay 1 week. Help get him established on a bottle. Work with a lactation consultant to find a solution. But then I'm gone, and you tell everyone I was just a temporary medical solution. No weird mafia marriage traditions, no sacred bonds, just a professional arrangement. Lorenzo's expression was unreadable. 1 week, and I wanted in writing a contract that says I'm free to leave after 7 days with no retaliation, no following me, no claiming me as some kind of property. He pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyer draw it up within the hour. Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned away from him, settling into the plush rocking chair positioned near the window. Privacy, she repeated. This time, Lorenzo left without argument, pulling the door closed behind him. Rachel heard him post someone outside. Of course he did. He probably had guards everywhere. But for now, she was alone with Antonio. Okay, little one, she whispered, unbuttoning her shirt with shaking hands. Let's get you fed. Antonio latched on immediately, his desperate suckling gradually easing into the rhythmic pull of a satisfied infant. Rachel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she rocked him. This was wrong on so many levels. She was feeding a crime lord's baby, sitting in a mansion bought with blood money, trapped by traditions older than America itself. But God, it felt right to have a baby in her arms again. To feel needed, to feel like maybe she could save this one, even though she'd failed to save Lily. Outside the door, Lorenzo leaned against the wall, listening to the silence that meant his son was finally eating. Finally at peace. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Vincent, I need you here now, and bring the lawyer. He paused, listening to his underboss's response because we have a situation. The baby has a wet nurse. He could practically hear Vincent's shock through the phone. In their world, everyone would know exactly what that meant. Yeah, Lorenzo continued, his voice grim. I know what the traditions say. That's why we need the lawyer. I need to figure out how to protect her without he stopped, not wanting to voice what the old ways would demand. What his grandfather would have insisted upon without question. When a woman nurses a Don's child, she becomes the Don's wife, not through ceremony or paperwork, but through an act older and more binding than any legal contract, through the sacred act of sustaining the family's heir. Lorenzo had told Rachel he didn't expect her to marry him, and he'd meant it. He didn't believe in forcing women into anything. Traditions be damned. But he also knew that in the eyes of every old-school family from New York to Sicily, the moment Rachel Parker had put Antonio to her breast, she'd become the Romano family's queen, whether she wanted the crown or not. And that meant Lorenzo had to protect her, had to claim her publicly as under his protection before rival families decided to make their own moves. Had to make it clear that touching Rachel Parker was tantamount to declaring war on the Romano family. He just had to figure out how to do that without making her hate him in the process. Inside the nursery, Rachel held Antonio as he nursed, completely unaware that she'd just become the most valuable and most dangerous woman in the American underworld. Unaware that Lorenzo Romano's rivals were already making plans, seeing opportunity in this unexpected development. Unaware that the man outside that door was already falling for her, drawn to her courage and compassion in ways that terrified him. Because in his world, love was a weakness. Love got people killed, but his son needed her. And increasingly, Lorenzo was realizing he needed her, too. 1 week, she'd said, 7 days to get Antonio eating properly. and then she'd walk away. Lorenzo stared at the closed nursery door and made a decision that would change everything. He'd give her the week, let her think she could leave, let her feel safe enough to lower her guard. And in that time, he'd show her that despite the darkness of his world, despite the blood on his hands, he could be what she and Antonio needed. Because 1 week wasn't going to be enough. Not nearly enough for any of them. For days into Rachel's 1 week, the mansion had become a strange kind of home. She'd been given a bedroom suite adjacent to the nursery for convenience, Maria had explained, though Rachel suspected it was more about keeping her close and secure. The rooms were beautiful, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a bathroom that had a tub large enough to swim in. Everything screamed luxury and comfort and captivity. Rachel spent most of her time in the nursery with Antonio, feeding him every 3 hours, learning his rhythms, watching him slowly regain the healthy flush that babies should have. Lorenzo was there for almost every feeding, sitting in the corner chair like a silent guardian, watching his son nurse with an expression that twisted Rachel's heart. He never pressured her, never crossed lines, but his presence was constant and increasingly magnetic. "He's gaining weight," Rachel said on the 4th evening. Antonio sleeping peacefully in her arms after his feeding. "Another few days, and he'll be strong enough to try transitioning to expressed milk in bottles." But Lorenzo's tone didn't sound pleased. He looked tense, wound tight. His jaw locked in that way. She was starting to recognize meant he was holding something back. "What's wrong? We need to talk." He stood, moving to close the nursery door more firmly. "About the situation." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What situation?" Word got out. He ran a hand through his hair, messing the perfectly styled black strands. "About you. About what you're doing for Antonio. 3 families have already reached out, making inquiries. Polite ways of asking if I've claimed you formally." His eyes met hers, dark and intense. "If you're under my protection as just an employee or as something more." "And what did you tell them?" "That you're mine." The words came out rough, possessive. "That anyone who touches you answers to me." Rachel should have been angry, should have railed against being called his. But something about the fierce protectiveness in his voice made her feel safe instead of trapped. "So, I'm a prisoner here. You're protected here." Lorenzo moved closer, and Rachel's pulse quickened. "There's a difference. You can leave. I signed a contract, remember? But if you leave, I can't guarantee your safety." The Rossi family has already made noises about wanting to meet the woman nursing the Romano heir. "Why would they want to meet me?" "Because you're valuable." He stopped just short of touching her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "In the old ways, the woman who nurses Adon's child holds almost as much power as the Don himself. She's sacred, protected," and he hesitated. "And what? And if something happened to me, you and Antonio would be the logical successors to control the family." The words fell like stones between them. "That makes you dangerous to my rivals and valuable to my allies." Rachel's arms tightened around the sleeping baby. "This is insane. This is my world." Lorenzo's voice softened. "I'm sorry you got pulled into it." "But Rachel," he paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I'm not sorry you're here." The confession hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Rachel's breath caught as she watched emotions flicker across his usually controlled face. Vulnerability wants something that looked dangerously like affection. "Lorenzo, let me finish." He cut her off gently. "These past 4 days watching you with my son, seeing him peaceful and healthy because of you. Rachel, you gave us both something I thought was lost forever. A chance at normal at family. I'm not your family. I'm just helping. You are family." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cooped her cheek with surprising gentleness. "The moment you fed Antonio, you became family. Maybe not in the legal sense, maybe not in the way the modern world understands, but in the ways that matter to me, to my son. You're already ours." Rachel knew she should pull away, should remind him about their agreement, about the 3 days she had left before leaving. Should definitely not be leaning into his touch like a flower towards sunlight. "This can't happen," she whispered, but her body betrayed her words, swaying closer to him. "Why not?" His thumb stroked her cheekbone, and Rachel felt the calluses there. Evidence that this man wasn't just a suit-wearing executive, but someone who knew how to use his hands, how to fight, how to survive. "Because you're dangerous. Because your world is violent and dark, and I've already lost." Her voice broke. I can't lose anyone else. I can't watch someone else die. Understanding flooded Lorenzo's expression. Rachel flinched. How do you know about I had you investigated? He said it without apology. The moment you offered to feed Antonio on that plane, I had my people pull everything about you. I know about your daughter, about the SIDS diagnosis, about the fact that you haven't worked since it happened, that you've been in grief counseling, that you're rebuilding a life that feels impossible to rebuild. Rachel should have been furious about the invasion of privacy, should have slapped him and stormed out. But instead, she felt oddly relieved that he knew, that she didn't have to explain the gaping wound in her heart. Then you understand why this can't be more than a temporary arrangement, she said softly. Why I can't get attached to Antonio, or does she stop unable to finish, or to me? Lorenzo's jaw clenched. Rachel, I know loss. I watched Sophia die bringing our son into the world. Watched her bleed out while doctors tried everything to save her. I held her hand as the light left her eyes, knowing that I was losing my wife and my son was losing his mother before he'd even taken his first breath. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't write us off because you're scared. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. These past few days, I've watched you be so brave. Enough to feed a stranger's child. Brave enough to walk into a world you didn't understand. Brave enough to love my son, even knowing you'd have to leave him. Don't tell me you're too scared to try. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. And then he was kissing her. It was gentle at first, a soft press of lips that asked permission rather than demanding surrender. Rachel froze for half a heartbeat. Antonio still sleeping in her arms. Every rational thought screaming that this was wrong. But then Lorenzo's hand slid into her hair, and she melted into the kiss like she was coming home. He tasted like whiskey and danger, and something uniquely him that made her head spin. His other hand came up to cradle her face, holding her like she was precious, like she was sacred. The kiss deepened, and Rachel felt 16 years of walls crumbling around her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not for a week. I can't. You can. His voice was fierce now, desperate. I need you. And unless I'm completely misreading things, you need us, too. Rachel looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then back up at the dangerous, beautiful man, offering her a life she'd never imagined. A life that terrified her. A life that somehow felt more real than anything she'd experienced in months. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. Lorenzo kissed her forehead, soft and reverent. But I'm more scared of letting you walk away. Before Rachel could respond, Antonio stirred, letting out a small whimper. She automatically began rocking him, maternal instincts kicking in. Lorenzo watched them, and the expression on his face stole Rachel's breath. Possessive and protective, and full of so much longing it hurt. Let me put him down, she said softly. Together, they moved to the crib, a massive thing of carved wood and soft linens that probably cost more than Rachel's car. She laid Antonio down gently, and Lorenzo immediately adjusted the blanket, checked the baby monitor, performed all the little rituals of a father who'd been doing this alone for 2 months. When he straightened, Rachel was right there. And suddenly, the air between them was charged again. The nursery lights were dimmed. Antonio's soft breathing, the only sound. They were alone in this bubble of domesticity. And Rachel felt the last of her resistance crumbling. I should go to my room, she said, but didn't move. You should, Lorenzo agreed, also not moving. We need boundaries. This is happening too fast. But when his hand found the small of her back, pulling her closer, Rachel didn't resist. When he kissed her again, deeper this time, with the hunger of a man who'd been holding back for days, she kissed him back with equal fervor. They stumbled away from the crib, mindful of the sleeping baby, until Rachel's back hit the wall, and Lorenzo was pressing against her, all hard muscle and controlled power. Tell me to stop, he murmured against her lips. I should, but will you? Rachel looked up into his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes that somehow made her feel safer than she had in months, and made a decision that would change everything. The word was barely out before his mouth was on hers again, and Rachel forgot all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Forgot about his criminal empire, about the danger, about the fact that she'd known him less than a week. All she could feel was his warmth, his strength, The way he held her like she was something precious he'd been searching for his whole life. When they finally broke apart, both panting, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. 3 more days, he said. Your contract gives you 3 more days before you're free to leave. If you still want to leave after that, I won't stop you. I'll honor our agreement. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. But Rachel, I'm going to spend those 3 days convincing you to stay. I'm going to show you that what we could have, what we could be, it's worth the risk. And if I still want to leave. Pain flickered across his features, but he nodded. Then I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're protected. Set up somewhere safe where the other families can't touch you, but I'll let you go. Rachel searched his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, for any sign that this was a trap. But all she saw was honesty and a vulnerability that this powerful man probably showed to no one else. Okay, she whispered. 3 days. Something fierce and possessive flashed in Lorenzo's eyes. 3 days, he repeated. Then he kissed her once more, soft and reverent, before forcing himself to step back. Get some rest. Antonio will be hungry in a few hours. Rachel nodded, her lips still tingling from his kisses, and slipped out of the nursery. Her legs felt shaky as she walked the short distance to her room, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She'd kissed him. She'd agreed to let him try to convince her to stay. She was falling for a man who probably had more blood on his hands than she wanted to know about. But God help her. When she was in his arms, none of that seemed to matter. Rachel locked her bedroom door and leaned against it, one hand pressed to her racing heart. In 3 days, she'd either be walking away from the first man who'd made her feel alive since losing Lily, or she'd be stepping fully into a world that terrified her. She didn't know which option scared her more. Down the hall, Lorenzo stood in the nursery, watching his son sleep peacefully. For the first time since Sophia's death, he felt something other than guilt and grief. He felt hope. He felt the stirrings of something that might be happiness. Rachel Parker had walked into their lives like an angel, offering salvation when he'd been drowning. And now, he had 3 days to make her understand that this thing between them wasn't just about Antonio needing a mother or about ancient traditions binding them together. It was about the fact that when he looked at her, he didn't see the broken nurse running from her grief. He saw his future. He saw the woman who could stand beside him, who could be strong enough to survive in his world, who could love his son as fiercely as he did. He saw his queen. The problem was Rachel didn't see herself that way. Not yet. She still saw herself as the woman who'd failed to save her daughter, as someone too broken to take on something as big as loving them. Lorenzo pulled out his phone and sent a text to Vincent. Cancel all meetings for the next 3 days. I'm not to be disturbed unless the city is burning. 3 days to convince Rachel Parker that despite the darkness, despite the danger, despite every rational reason she had to run, she belonged here with them in this strange fractured family that was somehow becoming whole again. 3 days to make her fall in love with them. Lorenzo Romano had built an empire through force of will and ruthless determination. Surely he could win one woman's heart in 3 days. As Antonio let out a soft sigh in his sleep, Lorenzo made a silent vow. He would give Rachel every reason to stay and no reason to leave. He would show her the man beneath the title, the father beneath the dawn, the heart beneath the armor. And if she still chose to leave after that, then he'd have to let her go, even if it destroyed him. But first, he'd fight like hell to make her want to stay. The game was on, and Lorenzo Romano never lost. Not when it mattered this much. Rachel woke to chaos. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence, rattling windows throughout the mansion. She bolted upright, heart hammering, and her first thought was Antonio. She ran barefoot across the hall into the nursery, finding Lorenzo already there, his son clutched protectively against his chest. What's happening? Rachel's voice trembled. They made their move. Lorenzo's face was carved from stone. All vulnerability from their kiss the night before, replaced by the cold dawn she'd glimpsed on the plane. The Rossis. They just bombed my warehouse on the docks. Before Rachel could respond, Vincent burst through the door, blood streaking his temple. Boss, it's a distraction. They hit 3 locations simultaneously, and they left a message. He glanced at Rachel, hesitation clear. Say it, Lorenzo commanded. They want the woman. They said if you don't hand over the Romanos' wet nurse by midnight, they'll level every property you own. The room spun around Rachel. This was her fault. Her presence had painted a target on this family. Give me to them. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. If it stops the war, no? Lorenzo's voice was absolute, brooking no argument. He handed Antonio to Maria, who had appeared silently in the doorway. Take him to the safe room now. Then he was in front of Rachel, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely controlled intensity. Listen to me very carefully. You are under my protection. That means I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone take you. Do you understand? Rachel saw it then. The monster everyone feared. His eyes had gone black and cold, his whole body radiating lethal intent, but his hands on her shoulders remained gentle. Even as fury rolled off him in waves. They'll kill you, she whispered. They'll try. A dangerous smile curved his lips. They'll fail, but Rachel, his expression softened fractionally. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She should say. No, should demand he let her leave. And this before more people died. But looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce protectiveness there, she found herself nodding. He pulled her close, pressing a hard kiss to her forehead. Vincent will take you to the safe room with Antonio. Stay there until I come for you. Don't open the door for anyone else. Lorenzo, I'll come back. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I promise you, Rachel Parker, I will come back. We have 3 days left. Remember, I'm not done convincing you to stay. Then he was gone, barking orders into his phone as he strode from the nursery. Rachel stood frozen until Vincent touched her arm gently. Miss Parker, we need to move. The safe room was deep in the mansion's basement, accessed through a hidden door in the wine cellar. It was surprisingly comfortable. A full apartment with bedrooms, kitchen, and enough supplies to last weeks. Maria was already there with Antonio, the baby miraculously still sleeping through the chaos. How long will we be here? Rachel asked as Vincent secured the heavy door. However long it takes, Maria's face was grim. The dawn won't rest until every threat is eliminated. Hours crawled by. Rachel fed Antonio when he woke, her body going through the familiar motions while her mind screamed with worry. What was happening up there? Was Lorenzo safe? How many people were dying because of her? When Antonio finally went back to sleep in the portable crib, Rachel found herself pacing like a caged animal. Maria watched her with knowing eyes. You love him, the older woman said quietly. It wasn't a question. I barely know him. That doesn't answer my question. Rachel stopped pacing, her shoulders slumping. How can I love someone whose world is so violent? Someone who probably has blood on his hands. My husband worked for the Don's father, Maria said. 30 years in this life. It took him in the end. A rival's bullet meant for the old Don. But those 30 years, they were full of love, loyalty, and family. Yes, there was darkness. There's always darkness in this world. But there was light, too. Does the light make up for the darkness? That's for you to decide, Miss Parker. Maria stood, moving toward the small kitchen. But I'll tell you this. I've worked for the Romano family for 40 years. I've seen 3 Dons, and I've never seen one look at a woman the way Lorenzo looks at you, like you're his salvation. Rachel was still processing those words when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then the backup generator kicked in, bathing everything in emergency lighting. What does that mean? Rachel's voice rose with panic. Maria's face had gone pale. It means someone cut the main power. It means they're here. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them, muffled but unmistakable. Rachel ran to Antonio's crib, scooping him up protectively. The baby woke with a startled cry, sensing the tension. Then the lights went out completely. In the darkness, Rachel heard Maria move closer, heard the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. Stay behind me, the older woman commanded. All grandmotherly warmth replaced by cold efficiency. More gunfire. Shouting, the sounds of combat filtering down through the reinforced walls. Rachel clutched Antonio tighter, tears streaming down her face as she whispered nonsense reassurances to the crying infant. This was her fault. All of it. If she just walked away on that plane, the door to the safe room shook with impact. Once, twice. Someone was trying to break through. Maria, Rachel's voice cracked. They can't get through that door, Maria assured her. But Rachel heard the uncertainty beneath the confidence. It's reinforced steel. It would take an explosion rock the room. Smaller than the warehouse blast, but devastating in the confined space. Rachel's ears rang as smoke poured through a crack that had appeared in the supposedly impenetrable door. Maria shoved Rachel toward the back of the safe room. There's an emergency exit behind the bookshelf. Take Antonio and run. What about you? I'll slow them down. Maria raised her gun, her expression resolute. Go, Miss Parker. The Don is counting on you to keep his son safe. Rachel ran, Antonio screaming in her arms, fumbling for the hidden latch Maria had shown her during the safety briefing. The bookshelf swung open, revealing a narrow tunnel barely lit by battery-powered emergency lights. Behind her, she heard the safe room door finally give way. Heard Maria's gunfire once, twice, 3 times. Heard a man's voice shout in Italian. Then she was in the tunnel, running blindly through the darkness with Antonio clutched to her chest, not knowing if she was running towards safety or into the arms of the enemy. Not knowing if Lorenzo was alive or dead. Not knowing if she'd ever get the chance to tell him that yes, God help her, she did love him. The tunnel seemed endless. But finally, Rachel saw light ahead. She burst out into the night air, finding herself in the woods behind the estate. In the distance, she could see flames rising from the mansion, could hear the sounds of combat. And then she heard something else. A car engine getting closer. Rachel turned to run deeper into the woods, but it was too late. The SUV screeched to a stop, and men poured out. Not Lorenzo's men. She knew that instantly from the way they moved, from the predatory smiles on their faces. One of them stepped forward, older with cold eyes and a smile that made Rachel's blood freeze. The famous wet nurse, he said in heavily accented English. Finally, take her. Rachel fought, screaming Antonio's name as hands grabbed her, but it was useless. They were professionals, and she was just a terrified nurse trying to protect a baby. The last thing she saw before they forced a cloth over her mouth was the mansion burning in the distance, smoke rising like a funeral pea into the dawn sky. Then darkness claimed her and Rachel Parker disappeared into the night with the Romano heir in her arms, wondering if the man she'd fallen for would even survive long enough to search for her. Rachel woke in a room that reeked of old money and older sins. Her head pounded from whatever they'd used to knock her out, but her first thought was Antonio. She bolted upright to find the baby sleeping peacefully in an antique bassinet beside the ornate bed where she'd been placed. Relief flooded through her. They hadn't heard him. Awake finally, the voice came from the shadows. The older man from the woods stepped into the light. I am Salvatore Rossi, and you, my dear, are worth your weight in gold. Where are we? Rachel's voice was Horo. My estate about 50 miles from the Romano mansion, or what's left of it. His smile was cruel. Don't worry. Your beloved Don is alive for now. I made sure word reached him about where to find you. Want him to come. Understanding dawned with horror. Of course. Lorenzo Romano destroyed my family 10 years ago. Killed my sons. Took my territory. Left me with nothing but scraps. And now he gestured to Antonio. Now he cares about something. Finally, after a decade of being untouchable, he has a weakness. 2 weaknesses, actually. He moved closer, and Rachel pressed herself back against the headboard. You and his precious heir. The sacred wet nurse, and the son who bears the Romano name. Tell me, does he love you? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play stupid. Salvatore's hand shot out, gripping her chin painfully. I've seen the reports. The way he looks at you, the way he's protected you. Lorenzo Romano hasn't cared about anything since his wife died. But he cares about you, and that is going to destroy him. He released her, smoothing his suit. He'll come for you tonight. I've made sure of it. And when he does, when he walks through those doors willing to trade everything for your safety, I'll take it all. His empire, his power, his life, everything. He'll kill you, Rachel said, trying to sound brave, perhaps. But first, he'll have to watch me hurt what he loves. And that will be worth dying for. The hours that followed were torture. Rachel stayed close to Antonio, feeding him when he cried, changing him with supplies Salvatore's people had thoughtfully provided. They wanted the baby healthy, wanted him as leverage when Lorenzo arrived. As dusk fell, Salvatore returned. He's here earlier than expected, actually. Your Don must be quite motivated. He hauled Rachel to her feet. Come, you'll want to see this. He dragged her to a large study. Antonio clutched in her arms and positioned her near the window where she could see the grounds below. Her heart stopped. Lorenzo stood alone in the center of the courtyard, illuminated by floodlights. No bodyguards, no weapons visible, his hands raised in surrender. But even from this distance, Rachel could see the coiled violence in his stance, the barely leashed fury in his posture. "Rossi," his voice carried clearly through the open window. "I'm here. Let them go." Victoria laughed, pushing Rachel closer to the window so Lorenzo could see her. The moment their eyes met across the distance, Rachel saw Lorenzo's mask crack. Raw emotion flooded his face. Relief, fear, love. "Your empire for the woman and child," Salvatore called down. "Sign over everything. Territory, businesses, operations, all of it. Make me Don of the Romano family, and I'll let them live." Lorenzo didn't hesitate. "I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt them." Rachel's eyes widened with shock. He was giving up everything. His entire world, his power, his legacy for her and Antonio. "Touching." Salvatore sneered. "But I think we both know I can't let you live, Romano. You just rebuild. Come after me." "No, you have to die. But first, you'll watch me take everything." He pulled a gun, pressing it to Rachel's temple. Starting with her, everything happened in slow motion. Rachel saw Lorenzo move impossibly fast for someone who was supposed to be unarmed. His hand went to his ankle, came up with a weapon. At the same moment, Rachel did the only thing she could think of. She bit down hard on Salvatore's wrist, making him jerk the gun away from her head. The shot went wide. Glass shattered, and then the world exploded into chaos. Doors burst open and Lorenzo's men poured in. They'd been there all along, hidden, waiting. But Lorenzo himself was already inside, moving like death incarnate. Rachel had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful. Salvatore grabbed for her again, but Rachel was done being a victim. She swung Antonio's bassinet at his knee. Thankfully, the baby was still in her arms, and the old man stumbled. It was all the opening Lorenzo needed. "You touched what's mine," Lorenzo snarled, and his fist connected with Salvatore's jaw with a crack that echoed through the room. The fight was brutal, but brief. Salvatore was old, past his prime. Lorenzo was in his prime and fueled by fury. When it was over, Salvatore was on his knees, bleeding, defeated. "Kill me," he spat. "End it." Lorenzo leveled his gun at the old man's head. Rachel saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the monster, the killer, the Don who'd built his empire on violence. "Lorenzo." Rachel's voice cut through the haze. He looked at her, and Rachel saw him, wearing with himself. Saw the darkness battling with the man she'd come to know. "He tried to kill you," Lorenzo growled. "He put his hands on you. On my son." "I know." Rachel walked closer. Antonio sleeping miraculously in her arms. "But if you kill him like this in cold blood while I watch, you'll lose yourself. And I need you. Not the Don, not the monster. We need the man." The silence stretched. Then Lorenzo lowered his gun. "Take him," he ordered his men. "Turn him over to the families. Let them decide his fate for breaking the old laws by targeting a sacred woman." As Salvatore was dragged away, screaming threats, Lorenzo turned to Rachel. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then he crossed the distance in 2 strides, pulling her and Antonio into his arms. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered into her hair. "When I saw the safe room breached, when I couldn't find you, Rachel, I thought I'd lost you both. You found us." Rachel pulled back enough to look at his face. "You gave up everything to save us. I'd give up everything 1,000 times over." He cupped her face with shaking hands. "None of it matters without you. The empire, the power, the name, it all means nothing if you're not here. The families won't accept that," Rachel said. "You can't just walk away from being a Don. Watch me." His eyes blazed with determination. "I'm done with this life, Rachel. I'm done with violence and death and living in darkness. You made me want something more. Made me remember there's light in the world. But the Romano family has a successor waiting." Lorenzo's smile was grim. "My cousin Antonio, yes, I named my son after him, has been angling for the position for years. He can have it. I'm taking my son and the woman I love, and I'm walking away." "The woman you love." Rachel's heart hammered. "Did you think I'd give up my empire for just anyone?" He kissed her softly. "I love you, Rachel Parker. I loved you when you offered to feed my son. Loved you when you stood in my world and refused to break. Love you now, standing here covered in glass and dust, still protecting my child." Tears streamed down Rachel's face. "This is crazy." "Probably. I've known you a week. Best week of my life. Your world almost got us killed. I'm leaving that world for you. For Antonio. He kissed her again deeper. Say you'll stay not for 3 days, forever. Be my wife, Rachel. Not because of traditions or sacred bonds, but because I love you and I hope you might love me, too. Rachel looked at this beautiful, dangerous, impossible man. Thought about her week in his world. Thought about how alive she'd felt in his arms. Thought about Antonio sleeping peacefully against her chest. This child who'd healed something broken in her heart. I do love you, she whispered. God help me. Then say yes. 6 months later, Rachel stood in a small church in Montana, wearing a simple white dress with Antonio, now chubby and healthy, babbling happily in Maria's arms in the front pew. Nervous? Lorenzo asked, looking devastating in a dark suit, his hand warm in hers. Terrified, Rachel admitted, but in a good way. The wedding was small. Just Maria, Vincent, and a handful of others who'd followed Lorenzo into his new life. Rachel's parents were there, too, cautiously accepting of their daughter's whirlwind romance with the reformed businessman who'd swept her off her feet. They didn't know the whole truth. Didn't need to. That part of Lorenzo's life was over. The vows were simple. No mention of dawn or empires or sacred traditions. Just two people promising to love each other through whatever came next. When Lorenzo kissed her, Rachel felt complete for the first time since losing Lily. This was her family now. Her impossible, beautiful, miraculous family. The reception was held at their new home, a ranch house on 50 acres of Montana wilderness, far from New York and the life Lorenzo had left behind. As they danced under string lights, Antonio sleeping peacefully inside, Rachel marveled at how much had changed. Any regrets? She asked against Lorenzo's chest. Not one. He pulled back to look at her. Though I should warn you, Vincent got a concerning call today. The family's found us. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Nothing threatening. Just checking in, making sure we're really out. And are we? He kissed her forehead. I made my position clear. I'm done. The Romano family belongs to Antonio now. My cousin Antonio, I mean. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with the Council of Families, who by the way officially sanctioned my retirement. Because of me, Rachel understood. Because I'm sacred to them. Because you saved the Romano heir when no one else could. Because you prove that love is stronger than power. Lorenzo smiled. The old families respect that. They won't touch us. As if on cue, headlights appeared at the end of their long driveway. Rachel tensed, but Lorenzo squeezed her hand reassuringly. A single car pulled up and a man in his 60s stepped out, well-dressed, carrying himself with authority. Don Benedetto. Lorenzo greeted him with careful respect. This is unexpected. Relax, Romano. The older man smiled warmly. I come as a friend, not a threat. The families wanted someone to deliver this officially. He handed Lorenzo an envelope sealed with wax. Your retirement papers signed by all 5 families. You're free. Truly free. Lorenzo opened it. Rachel reading over his shoulder. It was a formal document releasing Lorenzo from all obligations to the Romano family and the wider organization. Thank you, Lorenzo said quietly. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. Don Benedetto nodded to Rachel. What she did for your son, that kind of love, that kind of sacrifice, it reminded us all why we have these traditions. Why we protect women and children above all else. She earned your freedom, Romano. Both of yours. He tipped his hat and left as quickly as he'd arrived. Rachel and Lorenzo stood in the driveway long after the tail lights disappeared, the document still clutched in his hand. It's really over, Rachel whispered. It's really over. Lorenzo pulled her close. New life, new beginning. Just us and Antonio. He smiled. And maybe someday a little brother or sister for him. Rachel's hand went to her stomach where their secret was still too new to be visible. Maybe sooner than you think. Lorenzo's eyes widened. Are you 3 weeks along? I wanted to tell you after the wedding. She bit her lip nervously. Is that okay? His answer was to sweep her into her arms and spin her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, both of them were crying happy tears. More than okay, Rachel. You've given me everything. A reason to live, a reason to love, a future worth having. You gave me that, too. She kissed him softly. You and Antonio, you saved me when I thought I couldn't be saved. They stood in the Montana darkness, the stars brilliant overhead, with their past behind them and their future stretching ahead bright and full of possibility. Inside, Antonio let out a small cry. They broke apart with matching smiles. Parents now, partners, lovers, friends. He's hungry, Rachel said. Then let's go feed our son. Lorenzo took her hand together, the way it should be. As they walked inside, Rachel looked back once at the driveway where the dawn had delivered their freedom, at the dark trees beyond that hid nothing more dangerous than wildlife, at the stars that witnessed their happy ending. She'd walked into a storm 6 months ago on that airplane. She'd found the most dangerous man in America and fed his child. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, she'd found her home. Not in a place, but in a person. In a man who'd given up an empire for love. In a baby who'd needed her as much as she'd needed him. In a family built not on blood or tradition, but on choice. Rachel Parker had finally found where she belonged, and she was never letting go. 3 months later, Rachel stood at the kitchen window of their Montana ranch house, watching Lorenzo teach Antonio how to feed the horses. The toddler giggled as the gentle mare nuzzled his tiny palm, searching for treats. Lorenzo's laughter carried across the yard, warm and genuine in a way that still took Rachel's breath away. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, the father and husband who'd emerged from the ashes of the dangerous Don he used to be. Her hand moved instinctively to her growing belly. At 5 months pregnant, she was finally starting to show, the gentle curve a constant reminder of the new life they were building together. Literally. The morning sickness had been brutal, but it was worth it to see Lorenzo's face light up every time he felt the baby kick. They'd named their ranch Haven's Rest, a deliberate choice that symbolized everything they'd left behind and everything they hoped to build. Lorenzo had thrown himself into learning ranching with the same intensity he'd once applied to running a criminal empire. He studied veterinary care, sustainable farming practices, and equine therapy programs with the dedication of a man determined to master a completely different world. We should expand the therapy program, Rachel said as Lorenzo and Antonio made their way back to the house. Antonio running ahead on unsteady legs while Lorenzo followed with an armload of hay. I had 3 more calls today from families looking for services. Lorenzo smiled as he kicked off his boots on the porch. His hands were calloused now from honest work, his skin tanned from long days in the sun. The transformation from Mafia Don to rancher had been complete, and Rachel loved every rugged inch of him. That's good news. Though I still can't believe people pay us to let their kids play with horses. It's not just playing, Rachel laughed, reaching up to brush a piece of hay from his dark hair. It's healing. These kids have trauma, anxiety, developmental delays. The horses help them in ways traditional therapy can't. I know. Lorenzo pulled her close, careful of her pregnant belly. I'm still amazed every day that we get to help people instead of hurting them. That our work brings families together instead of tearing them apart. Antonio tugged on Lorenzo's jeans, babbling in the mix of English and Italian that delighted both his parents. Up, Papa, up. Lorenzo scooped up his son, spinning him around until Antonio shrieked with laughter. The sound filled the kitchen with pure joy, and Rachel felt her heart expand with so much love it almost hurt. But their peaceful existence was about to be shattered. Rachel was in the nursery, they were preparing for the new baby, when she heard the cars. Multiple engines, moving fast up their long driveway. Her blood ran cold. They'd been so careful, so isolated. Vincent checked their security regularly, but they'd all hoped that part of their lives was truly over. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, Antonio in his arms and his face carved from stone. Take Antonio to the safe room, he said quietly. Now, the safe room was Lorenzo's one concession to their dangerous past. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement, it contained enough supplies to last weeks and communication equipment to contact Vincent if needed. Rachel had hoped they'd never use it. Who is it? She whispered, taking Antonio from Lorenzo's arms. The toddler sensed the tension, his lower lip beginning to tremble. I don't know yet. Lorenzo kissed her forehead, his lips lingering. But I recognized the formation. 5 cars, professional drivers. This isn't random. Rachel's hands shook as she gathered Antonio's favorite toys and bottle. What if it's the families? What if they changed their minds about letting us go? Then we deal with it. But Lorenzo's jaw was tight with worry. Vincent should be here within the hour. I called him the moment I saw them coming. The doorbell rang, polite and civilized, as if death hadn't just arrived on their doorstep. Stay hidden until I come for you, Lorenzo commanded. No matter what you hear, don't come out. Promise me, Rachel. I promise. But her voice broke on the words. I love you. I love you both. He looked at Antonio, who was clinging to Rachel's neck with wide, frightened eyes. Be good for Mama, little man. Papa will be right back. Rachel made it to the safe room just as she heard Lorenzo open the front door. The hidden cameras let her watch as a man in an expensive suit stepped inside. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of brutal handsomeness that reminded her painfully of how Lorenzo used to look. Cold, dangerous, absolutely certain of his own power. Uncle Lorenzo, the man said, and Rachel's blood froze. Vincent had mentioned Lorenzo's nephew once, the son of Lorenzo's younger brother who died years ago in a family war. Carlos Romano had been raised by distant relatives in Italy, groomed to take over what remained of the Romano operations. Carlos. Lorenzo's voice gave nothing away. This is unexpected, is it? Carlos smiled, but there was nothing warm in the expression. You disappear for 2 years, abandon your family, your responsibilities. Leave everything to that weak cousin of ours who couldn't run a pizzeria, let alone our empire. Did you really think I wouldn't come looking? The empire is dead, Carlos. Lorenzo remained perfectly still, but Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders. The families agreed. I'm out. The old men agreed. Carlos began walking around the living room, touching Rachel's photos, examining their comfortable furniture with obvious disdain. But I'm not old. I'm not tired. I'm not ready to let the Romano name disappear into history because my uncle decided to play house with some nurse. Rachel's breath caught. He knew about her. About their life here. You researched us, Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. Of course I did. Carlos picked up a photo of Rachel, Lorenzo, and Antonio at the county fair, all three of them laughing at something off camera. Very domestic. Very boring. But also very valuable, don't you think? The threat hung in the air between them. What do you want, Carlos? What's mine? What should have been mine when you decided to walk away? Carlos set the photo down with deliberate care. The Romano name. The respect. The fear. I want it all, Uncle. And you're going to give it to me. I'm retired. I have no power to give you anything. But you have something better than power. Carlos's smile turned predatory. You have legend. Lorenzo Romano. The man who walked away from everything and lived. The families will follow you if you return. They'll listen to you. And when you endorse me as your successor, they'll accept me without question. And if I refuse, Carlos gestured toward the photos scattered around the room, then I'll have to find other ways to motivate you. Your wife is quite beautiful. And pregnant again, I see. How wonderful. Children can be so fragile, can't they? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rachel watched Lorenzo's face transform, and she saw the dawn emerging from beneath the rancher's disguise. The cold, lethal calculation that had once made him the most feared man on the East Coast. You made a mistake coming here, Lorenzo said quietly. A very big mistake. Did I? Carlos pulled out his phone, showing Lorenzo the screen. Your security isn't as good as you think. My men have been watching you for weeks. I know about the therapy program, the local kids who come here. I know about your pregnant wife's favorite restaurant in town. I know what time the school bus drops off the Henderson girl who comes for riding lessons every Tuesday. Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. He was threatening innocent children, families who trusted them. You have 24 hours to decide, Carlos continued. Come back with me. Resume your place as head of the Romano family. Name me as your heir, and everyone you care about stays safe. Refuse, and I start removing obstacles to my legitimate claim, beginning with the obstacles currently hiding in your basement. He knew about the safe room. Somehow he knew. Think carefully, Uncle Lorenzo. Carlos headed for the door. The Romano Empire will rise again, with or without your blessing. The question is how many people have to die first. After he left, Lorenzo stood frozen in the living room for long minutes. Rachel could see him through the cameras, his hands clenched into fists, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage. When he finally came for them, his face was carefully composed, but Rachel knew him well enough to see the storm beneath. How much did you hear? He asked as they climbed back upstairs. Enough. Rachel's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she held Antonio. He threatened us. He threatened the children who come here. Lorenzo nodded grimly. My nephew inherited the worst parts of the Romano legacy. He's smart, ruthless, and completely without conscience. And he's right about one thing. The old families would follow me if I returned. Then we run. Rachel said immediately. We disappear. Change our names. Move somewhere he can't find us. With what money? Lorenzo sank into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. Our accounts are monitored. Vincent helps us, but even he has limits. And Carlos has resources. Real resources. He could hunt us anywhere. So what do we do? I don't know. For the first time since she'd known him, Lorenzo Romano sounded truly defeated. In the old days, I'd have killed him the moment he threatened my family. But that's not who I am anymore. That's not who I want to be. Rachel knelt beside his chair, Antonio in her arms. You're not that man anymore, because you chose not to be. Because you chose us instead of that life. Don't let him force you back into being someone you're not. But what if someone gets hurt because I can't protect them? Lorenzo's voice cracked. What if he hurts you, or Antonio, or one of those kids because I was too weak to stop him? You're not weak. You're good. Rachel reached up to touch his face. There has to be another way. Some way to stop him without becoming him. The next 12 hours passed like a nightmare. Rachel couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the terrible choice hanging over them. Lorenzo paced like a caged animal, making call after call to Vincent, to lawyers, to anyone who might have an angle they hadn't considered. Vincent arrived at dawn with 3 of his most trusted men. His face was grim as he delivered the news. Carlos wasn't bluffing about his resources, Vincent reported. He's got backing from families in Chicago and Detroit, promises of territory and operations if he can rebuild the Romano Empire. And he's got something else. Photos of every kid who's been to this ranch in the past year. Their schools, their homes, their parents' workplaces. Rachel felt the baby kick hard in her belly, as if sensing her distress. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to stay calm. There's more, Vincent continued reluctantly. He's already made contact with some of the local families. The Hendersons, the Martins, the others. Told them their children might not be safe coming here anymore. Suggested they find other therapy options. Our program, Rachel whispered. He's destroying it. All those kids who need help, who trust us. It gets worse. Vincent pulled out his tablet, showing them a news article. 3 families have already pulled their kids. And there's been talk in town. Questions about who we really are, what kind of people run a ranch that attracts this kind of attention. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the horses in their pasture. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. How many men does Carlos have? Maybe 20. Vincent answered carefully. Why? Because I'm done running. Lorenzo turned back to them, and Rachel saw the dawn fully emerged in his eyes. He threatened my family. He threatened innocent children. He's trying to destroy everything we've built here. That ends now. Lorenzo, no? Rachel stood, Antonio clinging to her. You can't go back to that. You can't become that man again. I'm not becoming anything, Lorenzo said quietly. I'm protecting what's mine, the way I should have done from the beginning. But if you kill him, if you go back to violence, how are you any different from what he wants you to be? The question hung in the air between them. Rachel could see Lorenzo wrestling with it. The good man, he'd become warring with the killer he used to be. Then Vincent spoke up quietly. There might be another way. Everyone turned to look at him. Carlos is young, ambitious, but he's not established. The backing he has is conditional on his success. If he fails spectacularly, publicly, the families will abandon him. They don't like loose cannons any more than they like weakness. What are you suggesting? Lorenzo asked. Let him think he's won. Vincent outlined the plan quickly. Agree to meet with him, but on neutral ground. Make it look like you're considering his offer. And then destroy him the way he's trying to destroy you. Legally. Publicly. Without violence. How? Vincent smiled grimly. Carlos Romano has been in the country for 6 months on a tourist visa that expired 3 weeks ago. He's been conducting business meetings with known criminal enterprises. His financing comes from offshore accounts that the FBI has been tracking for years. We don't need to kill him. We need to hand him to the authorities on a silver platter. Rachel felt a spark of hope. But would that really stop him? It would stop him permanently. Vincent pulled up more files on his tablet. Immigration violation, racketeering conspiracy, money laundering. He'd be looking at 20 years minimum, assuming Italy doesn't want him back for their own investigations. But what about his men? What about the threats? Without Carlos, they're nobody. Vincent shrugged. Hired muscle with no employer. They'll disappear back to whatever holes they crawled out of. Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Set it up. But Vincent, if this goes wrong, if he hurts my family. He won't. Vincent's voice was certain. Because we're not going to give him the chance. The meeting was set for that afternoon at a restaurant in Billings, neutral territory that Carlos would consider safe. Rachel wanted to come, but Lorenzo refused absolutely. She would stay at the ranch with Antonio, protected by Vincent's men, while Lorenzo and Vincent handled Carlos. But as the hours passed, Rachel found herself growing increasingly agitated. Something felt wrong. Carlos was too confident, too sure of himself. Men like that didn't go down easily. Her instincts proved right when her water broke at 3 in the afternoon. No, 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 she gasped, leaning against the kitchen counter as the first contraction hit. It was too early. She was barely 35 weeks. The baby wasn't due for another month. Maria, who had moved to Montana to help with Antonio and the pregnancy, took one look at Rachel and immediately began timing the contractions. They're coming fast, she said grimly. We need to get you to the hospital. But Lorenzo was already gone, halfway to Billings with Vincent. And the nearest hospital was an hour away. Call him. Rachel panted through another contraction. Tell him the baby's coming. I can't. Maria's face was pale. Vincent made everyone turn off their phones for the meeting. Complete radio silence until it's over. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and panic. Vincent's men drove them to the hospital at dangerous speeds while Maria held Rachel's hand and Antonio cried in his car seat, frightened by his mother's obvious distress. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. At the same time, 50 miles away, Lorenzo sat across from his nephew in a quiet restaurant booth, fighting every instinct that told him to wrap his hands around the younger man's throat. You made the right choice, Uncle. Carlos smiled as he sipped his wine. Family loyalty always wins in the end. I haven't agreed to anything yet, Lorenzo replied carefully. I need guarantees. About my wife, my son, the innocent people who might be caught in the crossfire. Of course. Carlos waved a dismissive hand. Once you're back where you belong, they'll be completely safe. I might even let you visit them occasionally. Let me visit them. Lorenzo's voice was dangerously quiet. Well, you can't seriously expect to continue playing house, can you? Carlos laughed. You'll have responsibilities. Important work. Your little family will need to understand that the empire comes first. I see. Lorenzo caught Vincent's eye across the restaurant. Vincent nodded slightly. The FBI agents were in position. Everything was ready. But then Carlos's phone rang. He answered it with irritation, spoke rapidly in Italian, and his expression changed completely. My men just intercepted an interesting phone call, he said as he hung up. It seems your pregnant wife is having complications. Labor pains. Very premature. How tragic. Lorenzo's blood turned to ice. Of course, Carlos continued casually. My people at the hospital could be very helpful. Make sure she gets the best care. Or not, depending on how cooperative you are. You're lying. But Lorenzo could see the truth in Carlos's eyes. Somehow, he'd gotten to the hospital. Had people there. Am I? Carlos showed him a photo on his phone. Rachel in a hospital bed, clearly in labor, with a man in scrubs standing nearby. The man wasn't looking at the camera, but Lorenzo could see the gun under his medical coat. Let me be clear, Uncle. You're going to walk out of this restaurant with me right now. You're going to announce your return to the families. And you're going to name me as your successor. Or your wife and unborn child are going to have a very difficult delivery. Lorenzo felt the walls closing in. Everything they'd planned, all of Vincent's careful preparation, meant nothing if Rachel was in danger. He started to stand. But then Vincent's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece Lorenzo wore. Lorenzo, don't move. Trust me. On his phone, Vincent was typing rapidly. Within seconds, Lorenzo's phone buzzed with a text message. A photo of Carlos's man at the hospital, already in FBI custody. Another photo of 3 more of Carlos's people being arrested in the hospital parking lot. A final photo of Rachel, safe in a delivery room with real doctors and FBI protection. Vincent had anticipated this, had counter-surveillance at the hospital, had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. Lorenzo smiled for the first time all day. You know what, Carlos? I think I'll be staying retired after all. Carlos frowned, confusion flickering across his face. Uncle, I don't think you understand the situation. Oh, I understand perfectly. Lorenzo gestured, and FBI agents materialized from every corner of the restaurant. Carlos Romano, you're under arrest for immigration violations, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and about 20 other charges I'm sure these nice agents will explain to you. The look of shock and rage on Carlos's face as the handcuffs clicked into place was worth everything Lorenzo had given up. 2 hours later, Lorenzo burst into the hospital room just as Rachel was being wheeled into surgery for an emergency section. "How is she?" he demanded from the doctor. "Stable, but we need to deliver the baby now." The doctor was already in scrubs. "Are you the father?" "Yes." Lorenzo grabbed Rachel's hand as they moved toward the operating room. "I'm here, Amor. I'm here." "Is it over?" Rachel asked weakly. "Is everyone safe?" "It's over." Lorenzo kissed her forehead. "Carlos is in federal custody. His men are scattered. We're free, Rachel. Finally, completely free." Their daughter was born 20 minutes later. Small but healthy, with Lorenzo's dark hair and Rachel's determined chin. They named her Sophia Grace Romano, and when Lorenzo held her for the first time, he felt the last pieces of his old life fall away completely. The man who had once ruled through fear was now a father who ruled through love. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of recovery and adjustment. Sophia thrived despite her early arrival. Antonio adapted to being a big brother with typical toddler enthusiasm, and slowly, the families who had pulled their children from the therapy program began to return. Word had gotten out about what really happened. About the mafia nephew who had threatened innocent families and been taken down by the FBI. About Lorenzo and Rachel Romano, who had chosen to call the authorities instead of handling things the old way. It changed everything. Instead of being afraid of their past, people began to see them as symbols of redemption, of the possibility that anyone could change, could choose a better path. The therapy program expanded beyond anything they had originally imagined, and soon they were hosting families from 3 states. Haven's Rest became exactly what its name suggested, a place where broken souls could find peace. 6 months later, Rachel sat on the porch watching Lorenzo teach Antonio and their neighbor's daughter how to brush the horses properly. Sophia slept peacefully in her arms, tiny fingers curled around Rachel's thumb. The late afternoon sun painted everything golden, and the mountains in the distance stood like guardians over their little piece of paradise. Vincent arrived just as the evening chores were finishing, his SUV trailing dust as it came up the drive. But his visit wasn't about business or security. He'd come for dinner, as he did every few weeks. He'd found his own peace in Montana, helping to run the ranch and serving as a bridge between their old life and their new one. "Any word on Carlos?" Rachel asked as Vincent joined her on the porch. 25 years minimum, Vincent reported with satisfaction. The Italian authorities want him back too, but they're letting the U.S. have first crack at him. He'll be old and gray before he sees freedom again. "Good," Rachel said simply. She felt no guilt about it. Carlos had threatened her children, had tried to destroy innocent families. He deserved whatever justice found him. Lorenzo came up from the barn, Antonio on his shoulders, and their faces both covered in dust and hay. He looked tired but content, the kind of exhaustion that came from honest work and a full life. "Dinner's almost ready," Rachel said, standing carefully with Sophia still in her arms. "Perfect." Lorenzo kissed her softly, then bent to kiss their daughter's forehead. "How was the little principessa today?" She smiled. Rachel's voice was full of wonder. Actually smiled, not just gas bubbles. She looked right at me and smiled. Lorenzo's face lit up with such joy that Rachel fell in love with him all over again. This was the man Carlos could never have understood. The man who found more satisfaction in his daughter's first smile than he'd ever found in commanding an empire. As they headed inside for dinner, Rachel looked back once at the mountains, at the vast sky stretching endlessly above them. Somewhere out there was the world they'd left behind, the darkness and violence and endless cycle of revenge that had once defined them. But here, in this place they'd built with their own hands and hearts, there was only light. Rachel Romano had finally found where she belonged, and she was never, ever letting go.